"I object," the ruthless vampire king declared. Her soul had belonged to him all along. The sun had barely kissed the horizon when Lady Seraphine stepped into the shadowed path that led to the citadel of King Kale. Mist curled around the ancient trees like ghostly fingers, and the wind whispered secrets she could not understand. Her heart beat with a mixture of fear and excitement. She had grown up hearing tales of the vampire king, ruthless, eternal, merciless, yet strangely magnetic. And now, summoned by a letter written in ink as dark as night, she would meet him. Her carriage rolled over cobblestones slick with evening dew, each echo of the wheels against stone making her pulse quicken. She clutched the small silver locket at her throat, a token from her mother. "Stay strong, my child. You are the last hope of Alaris," her mother had said before she passed. The words were etched into Seraphine's mind like a melody she could not forget. She was not only a daughter of nobility, but a guardian of a kingdom on the brink of despair. The citadel loomed ahead, dark and jagged, a fortress of black stone that pierced the low clouds. Towers rose like claws, and banners of deep crimson fluttered in the cold wind. A shiver ran down her spine. Legends spoke of the halls inside, corridors where shadows moved with minds of their own, rooms where the walls themselves seemed to watch. Yet, even in her fear, there was a spark of curiosity. She wondered what kind of man ruled this place, this land of eternal night. The gates opened silently as if the citadel had been expecting her. Two guards, tall and still as statues, bowed their heads and stepped aside. Seraphine drew a deep breath and entered. The air inside was cool, scented faintly with old incense and the weight of centuries. Her footsteps echoed against the polished black stone floor, a sound that seemed to belong to the night itself. A figure appeared at the end of the hall. He did not approach, yet his presence filled the space like a tide. King Kale. The legends did not lie. He was tall, commanding, and impossibly still. His dark eyes, almost black but glinting like polished onyx, fixed on her with an intensity that made her stomach twist. His skin was pale, luminous under the torchlight, and his hair fell in waves of midnight down his shoulders. He wore no crown, yet every inch of him radiated authority. "Lady Seraphine," he said, his voice smooth and low, echoing in the hall like a distant storm. "You honor me with your presence." Seraphine curtsied, though her legs trembled slightly. "Your Highness," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the whirlwind of feelings rising inside her, fear, awe, and something she could not name. Kale's gaze never wavered. "You come from the last light of Alaris," he said, "a light that struggles against the shadow." He took a step forward, slow, deliberate, each movement precise and measured. "Do you know why I summoned you?" Seraphine hesitated. "Do I? I can only guess," she said honestly. "Perhaps to discuss the peace between our lands?" He tilted his head slightly, as though amused by her answer. "Peace," he repeated, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Peace is a fragile thing. But I do not summon you for treaties." He paused, and for a heartbeat, Seraphine felt as if the shadows themselves leaned closer to listen. "You have something that belongs to me." The words made her stomach drop. "I do not understand." Kale's lips curved into a shadow of a smile. "Perhaps you will in time." His eyes softened for just a fraction of a second, a moment so fleeting that Seraphine almost thought she imagined it. Then the hardness returned. "Come," he said, turning toward the inner chambers. "We have much to discuss, and time is short." Seraphine followed him, her curiosity now stronger than her fear. The halls twisted and turned in ways that defied logic. Paintings of long-dead kings and queens stared down at her, eyes that seemed almost alive. Shadows pooled in corners, shifting and stretching as if breathing. And all the while, Kale walked ahead, a dark silhouette against the dim light, guiding her deeper into his world. They entered a grand hall, its ceiling lost in darkness. Candlelight flickered along walls lined with carved statues, creatures part human, part beast, frozen in eternal motion. In the center of the room was a table of black marble, polished to a mirror-like sheen. Kale gestured for her to sit. She obeyed, feeling the weight of his gaze settle on her like a cloak. "I do not usually receive guests," Kale said, his voice low and commanding. "Those who enter my halls rarely leave with their hearts or their minds intact." Seraphine met his gaze, refusing to look away. "Then why summon me?" she asked, a small defiance rising despite her fear. "Because," he said, leaning slightly forward, "there is a bond you cannot see but you can feel. A bond that stretches across generations." His words were careful, almost gentle, yet they struck her with the force of a hammer. A bond, she whispered. Yes, he replied. You are not here by chance. Your soul, it belongs to me. Her heart raced, but not with fear alone. There was something in his words, an echo of inevitability, as if the world itself had conspired to bring them together. She wanted to resist, to run, but her legs refused. Instead, she asked, voice trembling slightly, "Why me?" Kale's eyes darkened, deeper than midnight shadows. Because your ancestors failed to heed the call, and yet you have the strength they lacked. You will either break the curse or fall to it. Seraphine shivered, the weight of the words pressing down on her. A curse. He nodded, rising and pacing slowly. The world you know is fragile. Magic lingers in places you cannot see. I have ruled these lands for centuries, but even I am bound by laws older than my memory. And now, the cycle has brought you to me. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. Seraphine could hear the distant howl of wolves, the whisper of the wind against stone, and her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but words failed her. She felt a pull, undeniable and strange, as if an invisible thread had tied her to Kale, binding them together before they had even spoken again. Kale stopped pacing and turned, standing just a few feet away. The candlelight caught his profile, sharp and beautiful, terrifying and alluring all at once. "Do you feel it?" he asked softly. "The pull between us, the threads of fate woven into your very soul?" Seraphine swallowed hard. I feel something, but I do not understand it." "That is only the beginning," Kale said. "Understanding comes with time and choice." She frowned. "Choice? Yes, you may fight it, you may run, or you may embrace it, but know this, the longer you resist, the harder it will become. And sometimes, by the time one realizes the truth, it is too late." His eyes bore into hers, and she felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her small shoulders. For the first time, Seraphine understood the stories. The tales of terror, of longing, of power, they were not exaggerations, they were warnings. And yet somewhere in the storm of fear, a spark of something else ignited: curiosity, fascination, maybe even hope. Kale stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. The shadows around them seemed to bend, drawn toward him, drawn toward her. "You are stronger than you know," he said quietly, "and stronger than I imagined." Seraphine's heart pounded in her chest. "I do not know what I am supposed to do," she admitted. "You will learn," he said, "and perhaps I will teach you." His voice was softer now, almost gentle, carrying a warmth that seemed impossible in the cold halls of the citadel. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, and a shadow flitted across the far wall. Seraphine jumped slightly, and Kale's hand, dark and commanding, brushed against hers as he guided her to the tall window. Outside, the moon rose, silver and full, casting light over the misty forests. The world looked vast and dangerous, yet beautiful, and for a moment Seraphine forgot her fear. Kale's gaze followed hers. "The night is not empty," he said. "It carries voices, memories, power, and now it carries you." She turned to him, searching his expression. Beneath the surface of control and command, she thought she saw something else, a glimmer of loneliness, of longing, of pain centuries deep. Her heart ached in sympathy and confusion. The silence stretched. And then Kale's voice cut through it like a velvet blade. "You belong to me, Lady Seraphine, and you always have." Seraphine's breath caught. She felt a pull she could neither resist nor deny. The words settled in her chest like a promise, terrifying, inevitable, and strangely comforting. She wanted to speak, to argue, to flee, but her voice failed. Only her eyes betrayed the storm inside her. And Kale, ever perceptive, understood without words. "Sleep tonight in the guest chambers," he said, turning away. "Tomorrow your training begins, and perhaps your understanding." As she was led away, Seraphine glanced back at him. The dark figure framed by candlelight, standing alone in the hall, seemed eternal, timeless, unstoppable. And in that moment she realized that the stories were true, but only partially. There was more, so much more, and it was waiting for her. Outside her window, the moonlight shimmered on the citadel walls. Somewhere in the night, distant wings beat against the darkness, and the forest whispered her name. She closed her eyes, feeling the pull of something she did not yet understand. Fate had begun its work, and there was no turning back. The first light of dawn barely touched the jagged walls of the citadel, and yet Lady Seraphine was already awake. The guest chamber, high in the eastern tower, was dim and cold. Heavy curtains blocked most of the sunlight, leaving the room bathed in silver shadows. The air smelled faintly of ancient wood and candle wax. Seraphine sat at the edge of the bed, fingers tracing the patterns on the sheets as if they could answer the questions swirling in her mind. The events of the previous night replayed endlessly in her thoughts. King Kale's words, "You belong to me, Lady Seraphine. And you always have," had struck her with a force she could not name. Fear, yes, but also curiosity and something darker, something that felt like destiny brushing against her soul. She did not want to admit it, but the pull was undeniable. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Enter," she called, steadying her voice. A servant stepped inside, a young girl whose pale eyes reflected the candlelight. She curtsied. "Mistress Seraphine, your breakfast is prepared. The king requests your presence after you have eaten." Seraphine nodded, trying to steady her nerves. She had expected a trial of some kind, a meeting, perhaps a test of courage or wit, but the thought of Kale watching her, judging her, made her pulse quicken. She dressed quickly in a simple gown of deep blue, the color of twilight, and let the girl lead her to the dining hall. The hall was vast, the ceiling lost in shadows and filled with long tables of black marble. Torches flickered along the walls, casting long, dancing shadows. At the head of the hall, King Kale stood alone, tall and commanding, his dark eyes fixed on her. There was no smile this time, only an air of quiet power that made her feel both small and alive. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and smooth, like velvet brushing stone. "I trust your rest was sufficient?" "Yes, your highness," Seraphine replied, though she struggled to keep her voice steady. Kale nodded, then gestured toward a seat across from him. "Come, we have much to discuss. And it is time you learn what it means to be bound by the threads of fate." Seraphine hesitated, then sat. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers intertwined. "Bound by threads of fate." "Yes," he said simply, as if the words held no power, though she could feel them pressing against her chest. "There is a curse upon your bloodline, Lady Seraphine, a curse older than the oldest trees, older than the kingdom itself. Your ancestors were marked long before your birth, chosen to intertwine with my existence." Her eyes widened. "Chosen for what?" "To protect, to serve, to fulfill a destiny they could not understand," Kale replied. He leaned slightly forward, and the intensity of his gaze made her chest ache. "And now it is your turn. The moment has come for the bond to awaken, and you must choose your path." "Choose," she repeated, trembling. "But I do not understand." Kale's expression softened just slightly. "That is natural. Understanding comes slowly. First you must feel. Then you must learn. Only then will your mind catch up with your heart." He rose and moved to the large window that overlooked the forests beyond the citadel. Moonlight still lingered in the shadows of the trees, and mist rose like spirits from the ground. "Look," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "The night is alive. It watches, it remembers, it holds power. And soon you will learn to sense it, to command it, to walk within it without fear." Seraphine rose and moved to the window, mesmerized by the forest below. A part of her wanted to run, to flee back to the safety of her ancestral home. But another part, a curious, daring part, longed to step into the world Kale offered. The shadows seemed to reach toward her, inviting her to see what lay beyond fear. "You fear me," Kale said, his voice quiet but certain. "Yet you are drawn to me. That is not weakness. It is life, it is survival, and perhaps it is destiny." She turned to face him. "And if I refuse?" Kale's gaze did not waver. "Refusal is an illusion. The threads of fate pull stronger than choice. You may resist, and the struggle will be painful. But in the end, you will arrive here anyway." The words chilled her, yet they carried a strange comfort. Somehow, in the inevitability of it, she felt safe, or at least understood. The day passed slowly, filled with lessons Kale insisted upon. She learned to read the whispers of the shadows, to feel the pulse of energy in the walls, in the floors, in the very air. He guided her with patience, but also with intensity, always pushing her limits, testing her courage, and forcing her to confront the fears she had never admitted to anyone. By evening, they were in the library, a vast room lined with books older than the kingdom itself. Dust motes danced in the candlelight as Kale moved silently along the shelves. "Magic is not mere trickery," he said, pulling out a leather-bound tome. "It is power, and power must be respected. The stronger your mind, the stronger your soul, the more control you will have over the world around you. And control is the only protection in a land ruled by shadows." Seraphine leaned over the book, tracing the intricate designs with her fingers. "And this will help me understand the bond?" Kale nodded. "It will help you understand yourself, and perhaps me." She looked up at him, catching a rare flicker of something in his expression. A vulnerability he did not hide completely, a flicker of loneliness beneath the endless authority. For a moment he seemed less like a ruler and more like a man who had lived centuries alone, craving connection. "Do you ever tire of it?" she asked quietly. "The rule, the solitude?" Kale paused, closing his eyes for a brief instant. When he opened them again, they were sharp, precise, and dark as midnight. "Solitude is a companion," he said. "Rule is a responsibility, desire is a danger. But yes, even I feel the weight sometimes." Seraphine's heart ached for him in a way she could not explain. She realized that behind the fearsome power there was someone trapped, someone longing, someone who had carried the burden of centuries alone. The library grew colder as night deepened. Outside, the moon rose high, illuminating the forest in silver light. Seraphine shivered, though it was not just the cold. Kale approached her, silent as a shadow, and stood close. "You feel the pull, do you not?" he asked softly. She swallowed hard. I think I do." Kale's hand hovered near hers, almost touching, almost offering reassurance. "That pull is not mere attraction," he said. "It is destiny, it is the bond, and it is only beginning." A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, making the candle flames flicker wildly. Shadows seemed to twist and lean closer, drawn by some invisible force. Seraphine turned, startled, and Kale's steady hand brushed her arm in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Do not fear," he said. "The night holds no harm for you, not while I am near." She felt a shiver of both fear and anticipation run through her. She wanted to ask more, to understand everything, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she nodded silently. The night continued, filled with lessons and whispered truths. Kale spoke of the curse, of the history of their intertwined souls, of the responsibilities that awaited her. Seraphine listened, learning not just about magic, but about the man behind the myth, the ruler, the warrior, the immortal whose heart had known centuries of isolation. By the end of the night, Seraphine found herself standing in the moonlit courtyard, looking up at the citadel walls. The world felt larger, darker, more alive than she had ever imagined. And somewhere deep inside, she felt a connection to Kale that frightened her as much as it drew her in. He stood beside her, silent and still, watching the shadows stretch across the stone. "The night is yours now as much as mine," he said softly. "And soon you will learn what it means to claim it without fear." She turned to him, searching his eyes, and for the first time she thought she understood a fraction of the truth. The pull, the bond, the destiny, it was real, and it was hers. A shadow flickered across the far wall, too fast for her to see clearly. Kale's gaze sharpened instantly. "The world watches us," he said. "Even now, forces stir that would challenge your courage. You must be ready." Seraphine swallowed hard, the weight of the night settling on her shoulders. "I will try," she whispered. Kale's lips curved in a faint, approving smile. "Try, yes, but soon you will need more than courage. You will need trust and strength you do not yet know you possess." The night stretched on, deep and full of shadows. And as Seraphine gazed at the silvered horizon, she realized that her life had changed forever. The threads of fate had begun their weaving, and she could feel them pulling her closer to the one man she could not yet fully understand. And perhaps she did not want to. The morning sun never reached the eastern towers of the citadel. Even at midday, the halls were cloaked in shadow, and the cold stone seemed to hold centuries of secrets. Lady Seraphine moved carefully through the corridors, her footsteps echoing softly. The events of the night before still lingered in her mind, the pale figure in the courtyard, the whispered warning about blood and bond. She could not shake the feeling that unseen eyes followed her every move. King Kale walked beside her, silent and watchful. His presence was constant, like a shadow that never left. She had grown used to it, almost reliant on it, yet every step reminded her of the power he held, the control he wielded effortlessly. And yet beneath that fearsome exterior she sensed something deeper, a man burdened by centuries of solitude, a heart trapped behind walls of shadow. "Kale," she said quietly, "who was the figure in the courtyard?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, his dark eyes scanned the horizon beyond the citadel walls, where mist rose over the forest like living ghosts. "A harbinger," he finally said. "A messenger of those who do not wish the bond to awaken. There are forces that fear what you are becoming. Forces that will try to destroy both you and the kingdom." Seraphine shivered, not only from fear, but from a growing sense of responsibility. She had come to the Citadel to understand, to learn, but now she realized that learning was only the beginning. The danger was real, and it would test everything she thought she knew about herself. The day passed in lessons of control and observation. Kale guided her through the Citadel, teaching her to sense energy, to feel the subtle movements of magic in the stone, in the air, and in her own body. Shadows seemed to cling to her, responding to her presence, and she learned to direct them, bending them subtly without knowing why. "You are stronger than most who have walked these halls," Kale said, his voice low, almost a rumble beneath the shadows. "Stronger, perhaps, than even you understand, but strength alone is not enough. You must learn patience, understanding, and trust, not just in me, but in yourself." Seraphine nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle in her chest. Trust. That was something she had never given easily, and yet with Kale it was different. There was no choice but to feel the bond growing between them, a thread invisible yet undeniable. It tugged at her heart, at her mind, at her very soul. As night fell, Kale led her to the training halls, a vast chamber where the floor was polished black stone and the walls were lined with weapons of all kinds. He handed her a dagger, its blade cold and sharp, and demonstrated a simple stance. "Defense is more than strength," he explained. "It is anticipation, understanding, and timing. One who trusts only their power will fall. One who trusts themselves may survive." Seraphine mirrored his movements, feeling her muscles protest and her mind strain. Every motion was precise, every step deliberate. Kale's eyes never left her, observing, correcting, encouraging. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and yet alive in a way she had never known. "You are learning quickly," Kale said, a hint of pride in his voice. "But there is more than technique. There is presence, awareness. Your bond enhances these things. You may not understand it yet, but it is the foundation of your power." Hours passed. The cold stone floors became familiar under her feet. The shadows responded to her touch, and the weight of Kale's gaze became something she almost leaned on. Yet even as she trained, a shadow lingered at the edges of her thoughts. The pale figure, the whispered warning, the sense that danger was approaching faster than she could prepare. Later, in the quiet of the Citadel's inner garden, Kale and Seraphine walked among moonlit fountains and stone statues. The air was thick with the scent of night-blooming flowers, and the sound of water echoed softly. For the first time, they walked side by side without lessons or demonstrations. "Kale," Seraphine said, hesitating, "do you ever regret ruling, being this eternal king?" He paused, looking down at her. His expression was unreadable for a long moment. "Regret is a complicated thing," he said. "I have lived centuries, seen kingdoms rise and fall, loved and lost, trusted and betrayed. Regret comes and goes, but loneliness remains." Seraphine felt a pang in her chest, a mixture of sympathy and understanding she could not explain. "You are not completely alone," she said softly. "No," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not anymore." He did not elaborate, but she sensed the meaning behind the words. The bond, the pull between them was not just a curse or destiny. It was connection. It was a tether that neither could deny. Their quiet was broken by a sudden commotion from the courtyard. Seraphine's heart leapt. Kale's eyes darkened instantly, and he moved with supernatural speed, leading her to the source. Outside, the shadows of the forest seemed to twist unnaturally, and a group of figures emerged from the mist. Pale, silent, and observing, they were not human nor fully vampire. They carried an aura of malice and hunger for control. "They have come for you," Kale said, his voice low and commanding. "And for the bond," Seraphine's breath caught. "What do they want? To destroy what cannot be controlled," Kale said, drawing a long, curved sword that shimmered in the moonlight. "They fear you. They fear what the bond represents, and they will not stop until they try to claim it for themselves." The figures advanced, and Kale moved to stand in front of her. "Stay behind me," he commanded. "Do not fight unless I instruct you. You must survive and learn." The attack came swiftly. Shadows danced violently around them, twisted by dark intent. Kale moved like a storm, precise, deadly, unstoppable. He defended Seraphine, striking with strength and speed that seemed almost inhuman. And through it all, she felt the bond stir within her, a warmth, a light, a connection to the power Kale wielded. "You must feel it," Kale shouted over the clash. "Do not fear the bond." Seraphine did not understand fully, but instinctively she reached out, and the shadows responded. They swirled around her attackers, pushing and restraining them without harming life. The bond between her and Kale pulsed like a heartbeat, guiding her movements, lending her strength. The figures retreated, sensing the power they could not overcome. Kale's blade cut a path of warning across the ground, and then they vanished into the forest's edge, leaving only silence and mist behind. Seraphine dropped to her knees, trembling from fear and exhilaration. I did not know I could. Kale knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. His eyes, dark and intense, searched hers. "You are learning," he said softly. "More than you realize, the bond grows stronger because of your courage, but it is not just power that matters. It is understanding and trust. Trust in yourself and trust in me." She met his gaze, feeling the pull stronger than ever. Her heartbeat was erratic, and the shadows around them seemed to hum in resonance. She realized with a sudden clarity that she no longer feared the bond. She feared losing it. As the night deepened, Kale guided her back to the citadel. The forest whispered around them, alive with secrets and unseen eyes. Seraphine walked silently, her mind a swirl of fear, excitement, and longing she could not name. Kale's presence was constant beside her, a steady shadow, a protective force, a tether she clung to without realizing it. In the quiet of the inner chambers, Kale finally spoke again. "There will be more challenges," he said. "The bond is desired by many, feared by others. You must be prepared, but remember, you are not alone, not while I remain." Seraphine nodded, her chest tight with unspoken emotion. "I understand," she whispered, though she knew she barely did. Kale turned toward the balcony, gazing out over the misty forests. The moon hung high, silver and eternal, illuminating the world in shades of shadow and light. "The night is vast," he said almost to himself, "and the threads of fate are tangled and unyielding, but together, perhaps we can survive it, perhaps we can master it." Seraphine stepped closer, feeling the bond thrumming between them. She did not know what the future held, only that the pull was undeniable, that the connection was unbreakable, and that the dangers they faced were only beginning. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, carrying a distant whisper. A name, a warning, a promise of trials yet to come. Seraphine felt the weight of destiny settle on her shoulders. She was no longer merely a visitor in the citadel. She was part of something older, greater, and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The night stretched endlessly before them, filled with shadows, whispers, and unspoken truths. And in the silence, Seraphine realized that she had already begun to change. The bond, the pull, the destiny. It was hers to embrace, to fear, to survive. And perhaps in the midst of darkness, she could find a light that was stronger than any curse, stronger than any danger, stronger even than time itself. The citadel was quieter than usual that night, though the stillness carried a weight far heavier than any sound. Lady Seraphine stood at the edge of the eastern balcony, her hands gripping the cold stone railing. The forest stretched endlessly below, shrouded in silver mist. The wind carried whispers she could not understand, and the moon hung high, full and luminous, illuminating the jagged towers of the citadel. Beside her, King Kale watched silently, his dark eyes reflecting both the moonlight and something deeper, centuries of knowledge, solitude, and unspoken longing. He had not spoken since the warning came hours ago. A dark presence was approaching, one that sought to claim the bond they had nurtured, one that could undo everything they had fought for. Seraphine shivered, not from cold, but from a mixture of fear, anticipation, and a strange thrill she could not name. The bond between her and Kale had grown stronger over the past days, stronger than either of them could fully understand. She could feel it pulsing, a rhythm like a heartbeat, invisible yet undeniable. "Kale," she whispered, "are we ready?" Kale did not answer immediately. His gaze swept the forest, calculating, searching, measuring the shadows. Finally, he spoke, voice low and steady. "Ready is a word with little meaning when dealing with forces older than kingdoms. But we are as ready as we can be. You have learned, you have grown, and together, we are stronger than any who would challenge us." Seraphine's fingers brushed against his as they stood side by side. The touch was brief, almost accidental, yet it sent a ripple through her, deep and warm. She looked up at him, seeing not just the vampire king, the immortal ruler, the legendary warrior, but the man behind the power, the one who had lived centuries alone, longing for connection, for trust, for a bond like the one they now shared. Suddenly, the shadows in the courtyard twisted violently. A figure emerged, tall, pale, and unnatural, moving with an almost liquid grace. Its eyes glowed faintly, red and cold, fixed on Seraphine as if measuring her very soul. "They have come," Kale said, his voice calm but edged with steel. He drew his blade, a long, dark weapon that shimmered with silver light. "Stay behind me!" Seraphine's heart raced, but this time she did not step back. The bond within her pulsed, a rhythm that seemed to guide her, lend her courage and focus her mind. The shadows around her stirred in response, twisting and shifting as if alive, waiting for her command. The figure moved forward, and Kale met it with a strike so swift it seemed the air itself bent around him. Steel clashed against shadows, and a surge of energy rippled through the courtyard. Seraphine felt the bond respond instantly. She lifted her hands instinctively, and the shadows around her obeyed, forming a barrier that slowed the attacker, keeping it at bay without harm. "You can do more," Kale shouted over the wind, his voice filled with urgency. "Feel it. Let the bond guide you." Seraphine took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. She focused, letting the pulse of connection flow through her. The shadows answered, curling around the figure, restraining it, twisting into patterns of energy that hummed with power. The presence snarled, struggling against her will, and for the first time, Seraphine realized the truth of Kale's words. She was part of this bond, not just a participant, but a force of her own making. Kale's blade struck true, forcing the figure backward. The shadows tightened, and the being let out a silent wail before vanishing into the night. Silence returned to the courtyard, broken only by the rustling of the mist and the steady rhythm of their combined heartbeat. Seraphine sank to her knees, exhausted and exhilarated. Kale knelt beside her, his hand brushing her hair back from her face. "You did well," he said softly. "Better than I imagined." Her chest heaved. I felt it," she whispered. "The bond, it guided me." Kale's gaze softened, a rare warmth breaking through the shadows of his eyes. "Yes, and it will guide you further. Together we can face anything." The night deepened, carrying with it the scent of earth and mist and magic. They returned to the inner chambers, moving silently through the halls of the citadel. Each step was measured, careful, yet they moved with a sense of unity neither had felt before. Once inside the chamber, Kale stood by the window, gazing out over the forest. The moonlight spilled across the room, silver and ethereal, and Seraphine watched him, feeling a pull she could no longer resist. "You are changed," Kale said finally, voice low. "Stronger, wiser, braver. The bond is not just a tie between us. It is your power, your essence, your courage made visible. You are no longer merely following me. You are walking beside me." Seraphine approached, her eyes meeting his. "I feel it," she said. "I feel the strength, the connection, and even the fear, but I am not afraid anymore." "Not if we face it together." Kale studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. That is what it means to be bound, not control, not dominance, but unity, trust and power intertwined. And now the final trial awaits." The wind stirred outside, carrying the faint whispers of unseen forces. Seraphine knew, without needing to ask, that the dark presence that had threatened them before was returning, stronger, more determined. She steeled herself, feeling the bond pulse through her, a rhythm that matched Kale's heartbeat, a force that made her feel unbreakable. They moved to the courtyard once more, shadows twisting around their feet. The figure emerged again, larger, more menacing, a dark aura radiating from its form. It spoke without words, a thought that resonated in their minds. "She belongs to me, and you will not stop what is coming." Kale stepped forward, blade in hand. "It is not yours," he said firmly. "It never was." The battle began, fierce and relentless. Kale moved with inhuman precision, striking, parrying, and guiding Seraphine through the motions of defense and attack. The shadows obeyed her, forming barriers, tendrils, and shields, weaving around the figure like a living net. The bond pulsed, glowing faintly, resonating with their combined courage. Seraphine realized something extraordinary. The bond was not just a tether. It was a source of power, a channel through which they could act as one. Her fear melted into focus, and for the first time she felt truly capable. Together they pushed the dark figure back, step by step. Kale's strength and skill, combined with Seraphine's newfound control of the shadows, formed an unbreakable force. The figure struggled, screamed without sound, and then in a final surge vanished into the night, leaving only a ripple in the air. They stood in silence, breathing heavily, hearts pounding, the bond between them humming like a living thing. Kale lowered his blade and stepped toward Seraphine, placing a hand gently on her cheek. "You have done more than survive," he said softly. You have triumphed. And you have proven the power of the bond. Seraphine looked up at him, awe and admiration in her eyes. I could not have done it without you. You did it with me, Kale corrected, voice gentle, not because of me. You have the courage, the strength, and the heart to face the darkness on your own. I only guided you, and now you are ready. The weight of the night's events settled over them. For the first time, Seraphine felt a sense of peace, of belonging, and of purpose. The bond was no longer a source of fear or uncertainty. It was a connection, a promise, a shared destiny. Kale turned toward the balcony, extending a hand to her. The night is vast, he said, and eternity awaits, but if we walk it together, there is nothing we cannot face. Seraphine placed her hand in his, feeling the pulse of their combined power, the rhythm of the bond, the certainty of their connection. Then we will walk it together, she said firmly. The moonlight bathed them in silver as they stood side by side, looking out over the misty forests. The shadows moved around them, obedient and protective, as if acknowledging their mastery over the night. And in that moment, Seraphine knew that the bond had transformed them both, from solitary figures of power into a united force, capable of facing any darkness. From the highest tower, the night watched silently. The threat that had once loomed over them had been vanquished, but the world was vast, and destiny was never truly finished. Yet for the first time, Seraphine and Kale felt a sense of hope, of trust, and of shared strength. Are you ready? Kale asked, his voice soft yet firm. Seraphine smiled, squeezing his hand. Yes, with you I am ready for anything. Together they turned toward the horizon where shadow and moonlight mingled. The bond between them glowed faintly, a promise of unity, love, and the eternal night that awaited. Whatever challenges came next, they would face them as one bound by destiny, strengthened by courage, and united by the profound connection of their souls. The citadel, ancient and eternal, seemed to exhale, acknowledging the triumph of the night and the awakening of a bond that could not be broken. And as the first hint of dawn touched the edges of the misty forest, Seraphine and Kale remained standing together, ready to embrace whatever the future held, their souls forever intertwined.